Chapter 1. The Unexpected Arrival. Patrick sat in the dimly lit living room, the sound of his newborn's cries echoing through the small apartment. He had been married for 6 months, but it felt like a lifetime. The baby had come early, just as his mother used to joke. The first one can come anytime. After that, it takes 9 months. But there was no humor in Patrick's situation. To tell the truth, Patrick had only married her because she was expecting. Raised to believe that a man owns up to his mistakes, he had felt it was his duty. And boy, was this a big one. He had been trying to prove to himself that he wasn't gay. And in a moment of desperation, he had slept with her before they were married. It was supposed to be a way to convince himself, to prove a point. But he hadn't enjoyed it. Sure, he had reached completion, but it was more about getting it over with so he could leave. The condom had busted, and he hadn't known. When he was done, he realized it was gone. Panic had set in, but he didn't know what to say. So he had washed up, gotten dressed, and left. Now, here he was, sitting at home with a crying baby while she was out with her friends. Patrick looked down at the tiny, wriggling bundle in his arms. The baby's face was scrunched up, red and tear-streaked. He felt a pang of guilt and confusion. This wasn't how he had imagined his life. He had tried to do the right thing, but it felt like everything was falling apart. He rocked the baby gently, trying to soothe the cries. His mind wandered back to that night, the night that had changed everything. He had been so desperate to prove something to himself, to deny the truth that had been gnawing at him for years. But now, he was trapped in a life that didn't feel like his own. The baby's cries began to quiet, and Patrick let out a sigh of relief. He looked around the room, feeling the weight of his choices pressing down on him. He had made a mistake, a big one, and now he had to live with consequences. As the baby finally drifted off to sleep, Patrick's thoughts turned to the future. He didn't know what it held, but he knew he couldn't keep living a lie. He had to find a way to be true to himself, for his sake and for the sake of the child in his arms. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the quiet room, each second a reminder of the life Patrick was living. He had been raised to believe in responsibility, in doing what was right no matter the cost. But now, he was beginning to see that sometimes doing the right thing for others meant sacrificing your own happiness. He wasn't sure how long he could keep up the facade. Suddenly, the front door creaked open, and Patrick's wife stepped inside, her laughter still hanging in the air from her evening out with friends. She glanced at Patrick, a mix of surprise and irritation crossing her face as she saw him with the baby. "You couldn't handle it for just one night?" she asked, her tone sharp. Patrick bit back a retort, his frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "I'm doing the best I can," he replied, keeping his voice steady. He didn't want to argue, not with the baby finally asleep. She rolled her eyes and walked past him into the kitchen, her heels clicking on the floor. "I need some time for myself too, you know. It's not just about the baby." Patrick sighed, feeling the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him. He knew she was right, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing himself in the process. As the night wore on, Patrick found himself staring at the sleeping baby, his thoughts drifting to the future. He didn't know what it held, but he knew he had to find a way to reconcile the life he had with the life he wanted. He looked down at his child, the tiny face peaceful in sleep. This little one deserved a father who was true to himself, who could show them the meaning of genuine love and happiness. Patrick wasn't sure how he would do it, but he knew he had to try. And with that thought, a sense of determination began to grow within him. He couldn't change the past, but he could shape the future. For his sake, and for the sake of his child, Patrick knew he had to find the courage to be who he truly was. Chapter 2. Unsettled Truths. Patrick awoke the next morning to the sound of the baby stirring in the crib beside the bed. He rubbed his eyes, exhaustion hanging over him like a thick fog. His wife was still asleep, her arm draped over the edge of the mattress. The events of the previous night were fresh in his mind, and a sense of unease lingered. He carefully lifted the baby, cradling the tiny body in his arms. The soft coos and wide, curious eyes met his, and for a moment, the world seemed still. But the tranquility was short-lived. The reality of his situation came crashing back, a tidal wave of doubts and fears. As he fed the baby and changed the diaper, his thoughts drifted back to the first time he had realized he was different. It had been in high school, during a locker room conversation with his friends. They had been talking about girls, their latest crushes, and the wild dreams they had at night. Patrick had laughed along, but deep down, he felt a hollow ache. His dreams weren't filled with girls. They were filled with thoughts he couldn't voice, desires he didn't understand. He had pushed those feelings down, buried them beneath layers of bravado and denial. When he met his wife, it had seemed like the perfect opportunity to prove to himself and the world that he was just like everyone else. But the truth was, he had never felt more alone. The morning passed in a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and stolen moments of quiet reflection. His wife finally stirred, her groggy expression softening as she saw Patrick with the baby. "Morning," she mumbled, running a hand through her tangled hair. "Morning," Patrick replied, forcing a smile. "I've got breakfast started. You should get some rest." She nodded, the tension between them palpable. They had fallen into a routine, a dance of obligations and unspoken words, but the cracks were beginning to show. Patrick wondered how long they could keep up the facade. After breakfast, Patrick took the baby for a walk in the park. The crisp air and the scent of blooming flowers offered a brief respite from the turmoil in his mind. He watched other families, children playing, couples holding hands, and felt a pang of longing. He wanted that kind of love, the kind that wasn't tainted by secrets and lies. As he walked, he spotted a familiar face. Tom, an old friend from college, was sitting on a bench, engrossed in a book. They hadn't spoken in years, but the sight of a friendly face was a welcome relief. "Tom," Patrick called out, approaching the bench. Tom looked up, a smile spreading across his face. "Patrick, long time no see. How have you been?" "Busy," Patrick replied, adjusting the baby in his arms. "This little one keeps me on my toes." Tom's eyes widened in surprise. "Wow, I didn't know you were a dad now. Congratulations." "Thanks," Patrick said, sitting down beside him. "It's been an adjustment." Tom nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I can imagine. Parenthood changes everything." They talked for a while, catching up on old times, reminiscing about their college days. As the conversation flowed, Patrick felt a sense of ease he hadn't experienced in a long time. But beneath the surface, the unresolved tension still simmered. Eventually, Tom glanced at his watch and stood up. "I've got to get going, but it was great seeing you, Patrick. We should catch up more often." "Definitely," Patrick agreed, though he knew it might be a while before they crossed paths again. As he watched Tom walk away, a pang of regret tugged at his heart. He wished he could have been more honest, more open, but the fear of rejection, of losing everything, held him back. The walk back home was filled with a sense of inevitability. The baby's soft coos and the rustling leaves were a backdrop to the thoughts swirling in his mind. He knew he couldn't keep living this way, trapped in a life that didn't feel like his own. As he stepped through the front door, his wife looked up from the couch, her eyes questioning. Patrick took a deep breath, the weight of his secrets pressing down on him. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he couldn't ignore the truth any longer. And so, with a heart full of uncertainty and a mind determined to find his true path, Patrick took the first step toward a future where he could be himself, for the sake of his child and his own happiness. Chapter 3. A Glimmer of Hope. Patrick sat at the kitchen table, staring at his cold cup of coffee. The baby was napping in the crib, and the house was eerily quiet. His wife had gone out again, leaving him to ponder the growing weight of his inner conflict. He knew he couldn't keep living this double life, but he wasn't sure how to find a way out. He decided to take a walk, hoping the fresh air would clear his mind. He bundled up the baby and headed to the park, the same park where he'd run into Tom. As he walked, his thoughts turned over and over, like the fallen leaves beneath his feet. Patrick found himself drawn to a quiet corner of the park, where a small, overgrown garden stood. It was a place he had often avoided, as it reminded him of the secrets he kept buried deep within. Today, however, he felt a pull, an urge to confront his fears. He sat on a weathered bench, the baby cooing softly in the stroller beside him. Patrick looked up at the sky. its vastness mirroring the uncertainty within him. He closed his eyes, letting the cool breeze wash over him. For the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, just maybe, he could find a way to be true to himself. As he sat there, he heard footsteps approaching. He opened his eyes to see an elderly woman, her face lined with years of wisdom and experience, walking slowly toward him. She smiled warmly as she took a seat on the bench beside him. "Good afternoon," she greeted him, her voice gentle and soothing. "Good afternoon," Patrick replied, returning her smile. The woman glanced at the baby, her eyes softening. "Your little one is beautiful. How old is she?" 2 months, Patrick answered, feeling a swell of pride despite his inner turmoil. The woman nodded, her gaze returning to Patrick. "You seem troubled, my dear. Is everything all right?" Patrick hesitated, unsure if he should share his burden with a stranger. But something in her eyes told him that she would understand, that she had seen much in her time. I'm struggling," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm living a life that doesn't feel like my own. I feel trapped." The woman listened intently, her expression compassionate. "Life can be difficult when we aren't true to ourselves. It's a heavy burden to carry." Patrick nodded, his eyes filling with unshed tears. "I married her because she was expecting. I thought it was the right thing to do. But I'm not happy, and I don't know how to be the person I truly am." The woman placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Being true to yourself is the greatest gift you can give to your child. They deserve to see you happy and fulfilled. It's not easy, but finding your path will bring you the peace you seek." Patrick looked at her, gratitude and hope mingling in his heart. "Thank you. I needed to hear that." She smiled, her eyes twinkling with kindness. "Remember, you are not alone in this journey. There are people who will support you, who will understand. Take it one step at a time, and trust that you will find your way." With those words, she rose from the bench and continued on her walk, leaving Patrick to reflect on their conversation. He felt a newfound determination growing within him. It was time to take the first step toward being true to himself, for his sake and for the sake of his child. As he stood up and began to walk back home, he knew the path ahead would be challenging, but he also knew that he couldn't continue living a lie. It was time to face his fears and embrace the truth of who he was. And with each step, Patrick felt a glimmer of hope lighting the way forward, guiding him toward a future where he could finally be free. Chapter 4: Unveiling the Truth. The days following Patrick's conversation with the elderly woman were filled with a quiet determination. He knew it was time to confront the truth and speak with his wife. The weight of his secrets had become too much to bear, and he could no longer live a lie. One evening, after putting the baby to sleep, Patrick found his wife in the living room, scrolling through her phone. The soft glow of the screen illuminated her face, and for a moment, he felt a pang of regret for the life they had built on shaky ground. But he knew it was time to be honest, for both their sakes. "Can we talk?" Patrick asked, his voice steady but filled with emotion. She looked up, her eyes narrowing with concern. "Sure, what's going on?" Patrick took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation that was about to unfold. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. He sat down on the couch beside her, his hands trembling slightly. "I've been struggling with something for a long time," he began, choosing his words carefully. "I've been trying to be the person I thought I was supposed to be, but it's been eating me up inside." His wife put her phone down, her expression shifting from concern to confusion. "What do you mean?" Patrick looked into her eyes, the weight of his truth pressing down on him. "I married you because I felt it was the right thing to do. You were expecting, and I thought that meant I had to step up and be a husband and father. But the truth is, I'm not happy, and it's because I'm not being true to myself." She stared at him, her brow furrowing. "Patrick, what are you saying?" Patrick swallowed hard, the words catching in his throat. "I'm saying that I'm gay. I've tried to deny it, to convince myself otherwise, but it's the truth. I don't want to keep living a lie, for my sake and for the sake of our child." The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of his confession hanging in the air. His wife's eyes filled with a mix of shock and hurt, and she took a moment to process what he had just said. "You're gay," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. Patrick nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I never meant to hurt you. I thought I could be what you needed, what our child needed. But I can't keep pretending. It's not fair to any of us." She looked away, her hands clenched into fists. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why did you let it get this far?" Patrick sighed, the pain in her voice cutting deep. "I was scared. Scared of losing everything, of hurting you, of being rejected. I didn't know how to face the truth, so I buried it. But I can't keep doing that. We both deserve to live our lives honestly." Tears streamed down her face, and she wiped them away angrily. "I can't believe this. I thought we had something real." "We did," Patrick said softly, "but it was built on a foundation that wasn't true. I care about you, and I want to be a good father to our child, but I need to be true to myself. I can't give you the love you deserve if I'm not being honest." She stood up, her body trembling with emotion. "I need some time to think," she said, her voice strained. "This is a lot to take in." Patrick nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Take all the time you need. I want us to figure out a way to move forward, to be the best parents we can be for our child. But I needed to tell you the truth." As she walked away, Patrick felt a mixture of relief and heartache. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with uncertainty and pain. But he also knew that he had taken the first step toward living a life that was true to himself. And with that step, he held onto the hope that, in time, they could find a way to navigate this new reality together, for the sake of their child and their own happiness. Chapter 5: A New Beginning. The days following Patrick's revelation were marked by a tense but necessary silence. His wife needed time to process the truth, and Patrick respected her space. Despite the uncertainty that hung in the air, he felt a sense of relief. The weight of his secret was finally lifted, and for the first time in a long while, he could breathe. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over their small apartment, Patrick's wife approached him. Her eyes were puffy from crying, but there was a resolute calm in her demeanor. "Patrick, we need to talk," she said softly, her voice steady. Patrick nodded, setting aside the book he had been pretending to read. "Of course." They sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Patrick had first shared his truth. The baby was asleep in the next room, the house enveloped in a fragile peace. "I've been thinking a lot about what you told me," she began, her gaze fixed on the table. "It hurt, hearing that you were not happy, that you felt you had to hide who you are. But I understand now that living a lie isn't fair to either of us." Patrick listened intently, his heart aching for the pain he had caused her. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." She reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "I know, and I believe that you want to do what's best for our child. But we need to figure out what that looks like. We can't stay together like this, pretending everything is fine." Patrick squeezed her hand, gratitude and sorrow mingling in his chest. "You're right. We need to find a way to move forward for all our sakes." Over the next few weeks, they began to plan for a future that looked different from what they had imagined. They agreed to separate, but to remain committed co-parents to their child. The process was painful and filled with moments of doubt, but they both knew it was the right path. Patrick found a small apartment nearby, allowing him to stay close and involved in their child's life. His wife, though heartbroken, began to find her own sense of independence and strength. They worked together to create a new normal, one that prioritized their child's well-being and their own journeys toward happiness. In the months that followed, Patrick started to explore his identity more openly. He attended support groups and connected with others who had faced similar struggles. It was a time of self-discovery, filled with both challenges and moments of profound clarity. One evening, while walking through the park, Patrick spotted Tom sitting on the same bench where they had reconnected months earlier. He hesitated for a moment, then approached his old friend. "Tom," Patrick called out, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Tom looked up, his face lighting up with recognition. "Patrick, it's good to see you. How have you been?" Patrick sat down beside him, feeling a sense of ease wash over him. "I've been figuring things out. A lot has changed since we last talked." Tom listened as Patrick shared his journey, his struggles, and his hopes for the future. As the sun set and the park grew quiet, Patrick realized that he had found something he had been searching for, a sense of acceptance and understanding. Years later, as Patrick stood at the edge of a field, watching his child play with the other kids, he felt a deep sense of peace. Life hadn't turned out the way he had initially planned, but it had brought him to a place of truth and genuine happiness. He had learned that being true to oneself was the greatest gift he could give, not only to himself, but to his child as well. And in that truth, he had found a new beginning.
Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey with Patrick in the courage to be true. We hope his story of self-discovery and authenticity has inspired you to embrace your own truth and live a life that truly reflects who you are. Remember, at Petals and Pride, we believe that every story has the power to blossom and shine. Stay true, stay proud. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more inspirational stories. Until next time, stay true, stay proud.